Let me just start by saying I do not condone using diphenhydramine to get high. People call it a trip, and I can attest that it nowhere close to anything you'd actually expect on a real trip, such as psychedelics. Here is my report. I hope you are both entertained and informed about the very real dangers of this drug. It was a Thursday night, and I had been taking DPH for a few weeks prior, after experiencing some absolutely mind-melting hallucinations, and was attempting to reach/join the 700 Club. For those of you who don't know, it is the term for people who have taken 700 plus mg of DPH. So I went to the store, got a hold of a bottle of Benadryl liquid, a bottle of Benadryl 25 mg tablets, and a box of Unisom. I chugged the liquid Benadryl, arrived home, and began popping the pink pills. A little while later, probably around 7:30 or 8 p.m., I started to feel the effects. I became overcome with the usual drowsiness, mild body load, but something was a little off. I suddenly realized I was feeling nauseated, and rushed to the bathroom, only to deliriously puke up what I can only assume was half-digested pills. I stumbled around in the bathroom for a minute or two, then proceeded to make my way around the house, not even remembering that I had just vomited everywhere. I made the mistake of walking downstairs, and my mom saw me and immediately began asking about my day or something. I don't remember much, but I was hearing what she was saying, but I would go to answer, and say something completely different. Almost right away, she began asking if I was high or drunk, and what I had taken. I was about to lie and stumble up to my, because it was apparent that the drug had begun its work, but she called my bluff, saying I could either tell her right then, or she would call the police. I became paranoid, and mumbled something about Dramamine or some medication. I finally decided not to fight it, and told her, through much effort, that I had taken a lot of Benadryl, 28 times the intended dose. She immediately freaked out and told my dad that we had to go to the hospital. I just went ahead with what they told me to do, and I went to get some proper clothes on. When I tried to put on a sweatshirt, my phone appeared, and I began texting on it. I believe I was on my phone for 5 minutes or more, before my mom told me that I was texting on the fabric of my sweatshirt. I realized that I was pretty fucked, and I grabbed my stuff and went to the car. For some reason, I grabbed my whole backpack like I was going to school. Time was completely off and I couldn't even tell what I was doing half the time. We arrived at the ER and we waited in the waiting area for what felt like hours. I began to see people I recognized in the lobby. This included teachers from school, co-workers from work, friends, and people I didn't like. The way DPH manifests itself is usually through unpleasant memories, such people you don't like. I felt like everything was normal, and was wondering why my dad had dragged me to some boring hospital. We finally got to talk to some people in charge and I was just kinda staring around, tired and confused. I was so over this shit already. I had no idea what was to come. At this point, I began pestering my dad and asking him when we will be leaving the hospital, thinking we'd only be there for a few more minutes. It is at this point that my memory kind of blanks out, but I do remember kind of stumbling around like a confused old man, with my AirPods in and my backpack on my back, from room to room, getting evaluated by various doctors, nurses and other officials. I also remember being stuck with quite a few needles and IVs. This hurt, and in my delirious state, I tried pulling them out, only to get yelled at by the doctors and nurses. I think I must have talked to 5 or 6 different people in different rooms, and the way this part of the ER was set up, all of the doors to the various rooms looked the same. This would have been pretty confusing sober, so you can only imagine how it must have felt while under delirium. I kept walking out the wrong door and eventually I had a few people watching me to make sure I didn't wander off. Again, my memory sort of cuts off at this point, but a little while later, it has probably been about 2 hours since I took the DPH, I remember sitting on an uncomfortable hospital bed, somewhere deep in the facility, hooked up to an IV machine, confused, scared and annoyed because I just wanted to go home and didn't understand what was going to happen. My dad was in the room sitting in a chair to my right, and I continued to beg and pleaded with him, asking when we would be leaving to go home. I just could not comprehend the fact that I would not be going home that night. There was a doctor outside the room looking in through a small window, and he seemed to be very rude towards me, which I can now perceive as frustration because I was acting like an absolute dumbass and kept wandering off. After sitting on the bed for what felt like a few hours, probably 20 minutes, I decided that I had to take a shit and began to get up from my bed while still connected to the IVs and various monitors. Immediately, the doctor came in and began to yell at me again, and I was confused and scared and a little annoyed at him and the other personnel because they were holding me down and wouldn't let me use the bathroom. It was at this point that I looked at my dad, and I think his head spun around upside down. Then his face turned into the face of one of my friends, and then I became convinced that my friend was in the room with me. A little while later, a nurse came in to help me and calm me down, and I was convinced that she was one of my high school friends. My memory blanks out once more after that, and the next thing I knew, I was in a private room in the intensive care unit. Apparently they had to sedate me because I was becoming restless and in my state of delirium, concerning enough for the nurses and staff to have to put me to sleep temporarily. My last memory before being knocked out was a hazy recollection of having these strange white gloves on my hands which were impossible to remove. Now I realize these were restraint/security mitts. I was told later by my parents that I was in the state for over 4 hours and didn't end up falling asleep until 2 in the morning. For reference, I took the DPH at around 8 p.m. The next day, I was still in shock that I was stuck in the hospital and kept convincing my parents that I needed to leave and asking every single nurse and doctor and person with a name tag whether or not I would be leaving that day. I spent the next 2 days in that room, with the nurse watching me and 2 large machines pumping fluids in and out of my body. I couldn't leave the room and could only get up to use the bathroom, but I did have a flat-screen TV with every channel and a built-in remote in the bed, so it wasn't entirely horrible. A few days later, I was transferred to a sister hospital with an inpatient psychology program. Apparently they thought I was trying to commit suicide, and wanted to make sure that I was okay before releasing me. After talking with many people and sitting in a jail-like environment which really had a toll on my mental health, I was released and returned to the normal world, to which I was ecstatic. It was enough to convince me to stop binging on DPH, and in addition, made me stop and not take simple things for granted, like the ability to do what you want and live a normal peaceful life. I hope those who take the time to read/listen to this report are able to gain some wisdom from it and avoid making the same mistakes that I did. Anonymous.